Why, hello there, and welcome back to Let's Talk. Today we'll be deviating from our standard video format for this series, but including it in the Harmony-only playlist, as what we will be touching on later in the video will affect the future of this series depending on what happens. And we wanted to do a video on this situation with HSR and get your opinion and start a discussion with you all. Oh, and by the way, this video will contain spoilers for the 3.0 story as well as touching on information about future versions. So please be aware before watching any further. So as the video title suggests, we recently finished up the Amphoreus 3.0 story, and right off the bat, we gotta say, we are so incredibly disappointed and feel so let down by the whole experience. But we're getting ahead of ourselves before we ramble on about Amphoreus. Let's run it back for 2 Trailblaze missions so you get the full picture of what happened. So, starting off, we'd like to cover the missions required to even travel to Amphoreus. And those are the Penacony University chapter featuring Rappa, as well as the Little Caper featuring both Sunday and Ting Yun. Starting off with the Rappa chapter of the Penacony story arc, we have one word for that entire chapter, and that, our friends, is Pandora. Oh yes, those few hours spent in the Rappa chapter of the Penacony story were some of the most boring we have experienced in the entirety of the Trailblaze missions so far. This chapter was much more suited to being a part of the Trailblaze continuance as opposed to being a actual Trailblaze mission which is classed as vital piece of narrative that pushed the story along, and compared to the actual main arc of Penacony was a severe downgrade story-wise. And honestly, the only characters we actually cared about throughout it all was Mr. Rika, Boothill, and Robin. Everybody else just felt so incredibly average and uninteresting, and having to sit through it, we came to the realization that we're not the biggest fan of Rappa, who unfortunately was the main focus of this particular chapter of the story, which did impact our motivation to progress. However, through sheer determination and outperforming an auto-clicker in inputs, we managed to make it into the next story chapter and the final mission of Penacony. So after getting a taste of life at university, the next chapter took us back to Penacony, this time following the stories of Sunday and Ting Yun, who now goes by the name of Fugue. And compared to the previous chapter, this one was a bit better. We follow Sunday around as he deals with the sins of his past and tries to right the wrong of his past doings. You know, standard redemption stuff the evil characters always go through when they join the good guys. Anywho, all this was done before he says his final goodbye to Robin and proceeds to exile himself permanently and ultimately becoming a passenger aboard the Astral Express as a result, all the while learning about how Ting Yun survived Fantilius' attack and how Ruan Mei brought her back to life. Overall, it was a better story compared to Rappa's chapter, and even though it dragged on in some parts, it was nowhere near as bad as Rappa's chapter, which finally takes us to Amphoreus and the 3.0 story quest. And we got to say, there was so much chatter it was unreal, which we could deal with. However, that wasn't the worst part of it. Oh no, you see right off the bat, you are greeted by an unvoiced Dan Hen and Himeko, which immediately tanked any immersion or excitement and just made us switch off the story completely, which is not the best impression to have with a brand new chapter. But before we ramble too much, let's move on. So we head off to Amphoreus, where upon actually arriving, March begins feeling rather unwell, making her unable to go down to Amphoreus, which eliminates one potential partner for our travels, which is not great, and honestly kind of sucked because we really like March. We love the dynamic she brings to an expedition, and her talent for calling out the MC because, let's face it, Dan Heng isn't exactly winning any conversational trophies so far. Anywho, this development left us 3 potential partners to travel down to Amphoreus with. Because Sunday just straight up said no, we had the Chad himself, Mr. Yang, the ever-lovely but now mute Himeko, or the now literal Silent Night Dan Heng. Can you guess who from this cast of individuals we now had to travel and spend multiple hours with? We'll give you 5 seconds to leave a comment with your answer. guessed Dan Heng, congratulations, you are indeed right on the money. Yep, that's right, for the next few hours of our life, we were now lumbered with a non-voiced Dan Heng, which is quite ironic given the fact that in his now silent state, he was now a lot more chatty in this world, as opposed to the 3 worlds prior, which was mind-boggling. Anywho, before we get sidetracked, let's move on, shall we? So now that we set foot on Amphorius, we were introduced to the cast of characters, whom we were going to be spending the next year of in-game time getting to know, and let's face it, convinced to pull. So to prevent this video from spanning into the hour-long territory, we're just going to go through the cast of key characters one after another and give our initial feelings and opinions of each one. Starting off with Phainon. Now, Phainon is someone who we find to be rather bland. We don't dislike him as a character, but at the same time, he's not very memorable one. As characters go, Phainon very much emboldens the character trope of, I am the main character, I am Mr. Hero Man, but it isn't until the very end of the story where we learn why he acts like this. We mean, come on, we save a city together and fight numerous battles together, and it's not until the end of the current chapter of the Amphorius story arc that we get any kind of context to his backstory and his struggles, and the worst part about it is, it doesn't even come from him. Mydei is the one who tells us about it, which is very strange considering the amount of time we spend with him during the entirety of the main campaign, so, you know, screw us, we guess. Anyway, moving up on the docket, we have the adorable trio in Tribbie, Tryon, and Tryan, and gotta say on top of being just absolutely precious. And really looking forward to getting them on Harmony only, which was a emotionally mixed bag. By the way, they are actually one of the few NPCs that genuinely feel like genuine friends that we have made on our journey so far. We mean after everything we do for Amphorius and felling a literal god for them, Tribbie actually feels like one of the few scarce NPCs among the cast that would give us the time of day and say, hey man, you did good today. Thank you for your hard work, it means a lot. Plus they fight using rockets, which is always a win in our book. Moving on from Tribbie, we have the emerald-eyed Agalea, and right off the bat we're just gonna say it. We do not trust this woman. Zero. Zilch. Nada. She is suspicious with a capital Sus. And this feeling was not helped by the fact that, A, she uses her threads to force the truth out of us as soon as we meet her without even asking consent, and B, sets us up to be executed due to a numbnuts of an NPC who's never heard of the concept of privacy. And yes, we know she was never going to actually kill us. And no, we don't care how fake it was at the time, we still don't trust her that ship has sailed. And also, for all you out there who think that you can fix her, newsflash, there's no fixing this.
Mission failed! We'll get them next time.
But in all seriousness, we're calling it now. She is going to be a villain at some point in the Amphorius story arc. We are 100% calling it. And you can timestamp this quote and take it to the bank. And if it doesn't end up being true, we'll do something soul-shattering. Like we don't know actually finishing a Geo-only boss rush on Genshin Impact. You know something really horrible and soul-shattering. Regardless, we're losing track of the main point. It really is a shame she behaves the way she does because she looks like she could be an interesting character to learn about, but so far the lack of trust that has become mutual at this point is really making it difficult to even care. But potential conspiracies aside, let's move on, shall we? And let's talk about Mydei, and immediately we just want to say that this guy is a certified badass. His aesthetic, his tattoos, the fact he's just a badass berserker brawler that literally yeets his enemies as if they were freaking baseballs in the major league match is just one of the many reasons that we're a fan of him. Mydei has very quickly become one of our favorite characters in this story. From the crestfallen background as a self-exiled prince from a nation of warriors, to the fact that this dude has literal plot armor and is just way too badass to die. And it's safe to say the portions of the story that featured Mydei were the bits that we enjoyed, maybe a little too much. But come on, this dude is pretty badass and ended up causing us a bit of PTSD because honestly, this is how Dehya should have been in Genshin Impact. And yes, we are still very salty at the fact we pulled her on her banner and she was as useful as a piece of paper floating in a puddle. Regardless, the badass berserker character will always be one of our most favorite types of characters in gaming. And whenever Mydei showed up on the screen during the campaign, we physically felt our testosterone skyrocket every time, to the point that by the end of the story arc, even our chin was doing dumbbell reps. But gushing aside, let's move on to our last character in the Amphoria story, and was once one of our most looked forward to characters outside of Mydei. However, given recent developments, has the potential to herald the end of both HonkaiStarRail as a whole alongside our Harmony-only series. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the unfortunate soul known as Castorice. And as a character, she is a very mysterious individual and not great in social situations, which is a relatable trope among many, and also looks very elegant with a perfect mixture of white and purple tones in her attire. Castorice, along with Tribbie and to some degree Phainon, have proved that our efforts to assist Amphorius and its people doesn't fall on deaf ears. And while we would like to have a strong opinion of Castorice, unfortunately, as of the current arc, we don't really know much about her. And her release is shaping up to be the literal death for the game as a whole with what she symbolizes, which, to state the obvious, is not great. However, what we do know about Castorice is the fact that she is currently searching for the Titan of Death in the pursuit of reclaiming her other half from them, which as a story and goal is quite interesting and has definitely piqued our interest and could also prove to be the highlight of the story if done correctly. However, now we must talk about the elephant in the room and the second reason that this video exists, and that is Castorice's passive. Now we're going to state that typically we don't give much stock in leaks and really do try not to see or engage with them if we can help it, but ultimately it backfires regardless because we get recommended them anyway. It's very much a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. However, when we saw this making the rounds across the net, we knew for a fact that this passive isn't a placeholder passive for development, but instead Hoyoverse trying their luck to see what bull they can get away with this time, and we will explain why we feel like that a bit later on. Now for those among you that don't have any idea on what's going on and don't really pay attention to news videos regarding HSR, recently the entire HSR community have began sharpening their pitchforks and lighting their torches, and this time it is rather justifiable. So much so that we're making a video on it. So what's gotten everybody so hot under the collar? Well, the reason people are angry is due to a leak about a certain passive in Castorice's kit. A passive which, if it is allowed to make it into the live version of the game, can and will destroy not just HonkaiStarRail, but every game and gacha game in perpetuity. As what this passive represents is something that involves everybody that plays games, whether it be for fun or for work. This involves you, and you need to speak up now of all times. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, surely it can't be that bad, right? We mean, it's a leak, it's not set in stone, right?
Wrong.
You'll understand the severity once we read through it, and if what we're about to read you wasn't bad enough, keep in mind that Castorice is just one of 4 upcoming units with a similar universal passive attached to their kits. Which is why it is important for all of us to nip this in the bud right now and call the complete removal of universal passives from any future units. So getting into the passive, it reads, after obtaining Castorice. Keep those words in mind, folks. Or when Castorice is in the current team, the team received the following effect in battle. When an ally character or characters in the team receives a killing blow, meaning if one or more of your characters die during battle, all characters who received a killing blow enter the Lunar Cocoon state. Characters in Lunar Cocoon state delay becoming downed and can take one action normally after this action. If they receive healing or have a shield before their next turn, the Lunar Cocoon effect is then removed, bringing the character back to life. Otherwise, they will be downed immediately. This effect can be triggered once per battle. Now, you probably listened to that and thought that doesn't sound so bad. What's the issue? Well, you see, this rabbit hole goes even deeper due to the fact that during the same patch as Castorice's release, there will be a new boss coming that has the ability to drain your health to 1 regardless of your shields or how much health your characters have at the time of taking this attack. Meaning if you don't have a fantastic healer like Lingsha or a Chad Shielder like Adventurine in your roster, then you just lose. No argument, no debate. It's just LOL, you should have forked over that 300 pounds for Castorice, loser. Now you don't get to play.
Hello, I like money.
Now the reason this passive is such a damning thing for both this game as well as future games that decide to adopt this strategy is that it works on teams that Castorice is not actively a part of. So for example, if we were to fight this boss on our Harmony-only account, there will be literally no way we could win against this new boss without Castorice on our account. Even with Tribbie being as busted as she is, it would still be pointless because we will die a lot. Meaning not just our Harmony-only account, but various other people who are also doing their own challenge accounts, without even mentioning people with normal accounts who can't secure Castorice, are now put at a severe disadvantage and can no longer compete with someone who does have Castorice, pretty much making your account inferior. Now earlier in this section, we stated that not only is there 3 more characters with passives like this coming, but also that these passives not only affect HSR as a whole, but every other game in perpetuity, and ladies and gentlemen, that's not an understatement nor an exaggeration. If this passive makes it into the game and people shovel it up, it will ruin gaming as a whole, flat out. Due to the fact that other companies will look at this and learn the wrong lesson from it, and will actively try to replicate it in their games going forward. Especially companies like EA that only think about the money. Now sure, there will be some companies that will look at this approach and go, no thank you. But let's be real, those will be so few and far between that they'll be inconsequential, and stuff like this will become widespread if given the chance. And we don't know about you, but the last thing we want is for this rot to spread to a game we actively enjoy like Wuthering Waves. Because let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, it is no secret that HSR has been feeling more and more like a chore to play with every single update. Since Penacony, and with every patch, more of our resolve to play is being gradually sapped from us, which is heartbreaking due to the fact that HSR was amazing when it released, and Harmony Only is the series with the most sentimental value for us on the channel, because at the start of Harmony Only was the time we learned to edit videos. And the first episode of Harmony Only was our first time ever making a video, and you guys and girls loved it, and for it to potentially come to an end, not because the challenge isn't possible, but just due to a company's greed, is kind of gut-wrenching if we're being honest, because we love this series, and HSR can be the amazing game that it once was again, but only if they listen to their players right now. And this whole debacle really does affirm our belief that the leaders of Hoyoverse doesn't seem to realize that their current business model, while effective, has a self-sabotaging effect that they're either unaware of or alarmingly very aware of but just don't care. And the only thing that comes to mind is that meme of the guy riding his bike while holding a stick, and then proceeds to jam that very same stick in the wheel of the bike he is currently riding. Now we say this as a veteran of 4 Hoyoverse games: Honkai Impact 3rd, Genshin Impact, HSR, and Zenless Zone Zero. We know we have problems, and the sky is blue moving on. Having witnessed the decisions made in these various games always seem to have the same result, where the game is doing well and then they make a decision or a series of decisions that tanks the popularity of that game. A prime orchestrator of this being Genshin Impact only, rather than making decisions that would be beneficial to them and net them more money, they do the opposite, which is baffling because when Genshin Impact released, it was monumental. They created a game based of a cult classic and added anime women, and it had the once-in-a-lifetime boon of being released during a dire time in people's lives where they couldn't go anywhere and ultimately needed it more than ever, which then lead it to becoming a worldwide phenomenon. We mean you couldn't even take a breath without seeing someone play Genshin online, or it being mentioned in some regard. Not to mention the amount of normal people who had never touched nor heard of a gacha game before prior to its release, suddenly jumping on board. Millions and millions of people were now hook, line, and sinker, 66 million of them in 2023. As a matter of fact, yet rather than strike while the iron was hottest and drive that baby home, They let it stagnate and rot, and while HSR doesn't have those numbers, especially in 2025 with only 125,706 players actively playing the game, HSR got a lot more love than the Genshin Impact community could even dream of, ultimately leading to the iconic phrase from the community, "Genshin could never." Now we would like to think that we're just being paranoid and everything is gonna be okay. However, we're beginning to see the writing on the wall, and it ain't looking great. Ladies and gentlemen, version 2.3 of HonkaiStarRail could well be the beginning of the end, as we're beginning to see the Genshin approach seep into the game. Now it's hard to pinpoint the exact point in time where the decline of HSR began, as different individuals will likely tell you different things. However, personally speaking, from our experience, we can tell you where we think the game began to fall flat and stagnate. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the introduction of the Rappa quest as a main Trailblaze mission, rather than having it as a Trailblaze continuance mission, like the War Dance chapter on the Lufu. Because during that quest, we noticed a severe shift of quality during this chapter, mostly in writing, but also in the fact that there wasn't as much combat as there was in previous missions, which had become a trend spanning into the Penacony story, which is a major letdown from Belobog. In the Belobog story, it was paced perfectly with perfect blend of narrative mixed in with a constant supply of combat and many hurdles to overcome and conquer. The story in Belobog followed the key rule of storytelling, and that is show don't tell. And that is so far from what we have now, because now the current writing feels like it came straight out of Genshin Impact. And that is not the way to go. It can be better. It was better, however, we're losing our train of thought from the main issue. If these passives makes it into live version of the games we love, the games we enjoy, will suffer as a result. Maybe not straight away, but it will eventually seep in as more companies realize that they can adopt this strategy and warp this into an even more predatory version than what we see now. And it will spell ruin unless we do something now. So we would like to ask that you help spread the word and help raise awareness and make it public. Make it painfully clear that this kind of thing has no place in HSR or in any game and must be removed, not nerfed, flat out removed, because if we don't stop this now, it'll never be stopped. And honestly, ladies and gentlemen, if these passive do end up making it into the game, we will wrap up our Harmony-only series as a whole, regardless of how much it will suck to do so. Because as this makes it in and this approach evolves, there will be literally no way for our Harmoniers to compete without these buffs. And even if they do get buffed to a more powerful state like they said they would in version 2.3, it won't matter. Because there will always be that next character with the next groundbreaking buff, and we would rather ultimately end a beloved series on a high note as opposed to a sour one. And on that rather somber note, we can finally sum up our adventures and feelings on HSR at the current moment now. And that is that this current approach to universal buffs is a rather tone-deaf and scummy one. The idea of account-wide buffs tied into characters with a 300+ pound price tag is just foolish. And if they wanted to add universal buffs in a way that didn't incur the wrath of their player base, the simplest way would be to either add new endgame content with a special resource that can be farmed and then used to level up a skill tree, or implement it into existing endgame modes such as the Divergent Universe. These approaches would be more preferable, as that will give players like us a genuine reason to grind out the Divergent Universe. Because let's face it, besides speed farming planar relics and getting a few stellar jades, there is literally no reason to overly invest and grind this game mode. And as for the Trailblaze mission so far, the whole experience is feeling kind of flat as of right now. But are some redeeming factors in regard to Amphorius, such as its scenery and the rather amazing music, which both captures ambiance and suspense quite well. It's really just the story narrative and lack of voice acting really impacts the whole experience. And while it is very clear that they're cooking up something for March in the story, we would have much preferred that she was also in Amphorius with us, and underwent whatever they're cooking with her condition, maybe 3/4 throughout the first arc of the story, as honestly her presence was needed now, more than ever in the story. And if that was never an option, then they really should have just let us go down to Amphorius with Welt rather than Dan Heng. HSR currently has us in a record low hype level for the game, and has us genuinely worried about its future. Now we know what Hoyoverse is trying to achieve, and we won't lie, it's really testing our love for this once amazing game and them as a developer. And it's a real shame to see, as they really do make amazing content, but just end up sabotaging it in the most foolish ways. But hopefully it'll get better the more people talk about it and voice their concerns. And now more than ever is the time for both players from East and the West to come together and just say no to this bull. Now, while today's video took quite a heavy turn, and typically we prefer to stay out of uproars like this topic was just way too important to sit on the sidelines for, and it's things like this that need to be addressed by us, the players. Because as players, we do have a duty to call companies out on their BS and let them know when they're stepping over a line. So please spread the word and throw your hat into the ring and say your piece. Because we, as the players, do have the power to stop this, but only if we can come together to do so. And so with a speech that would put Highlander to shame, we will now bid you all farewell. And until next time, our friends, remember to take care, stay safe, and hopefully us in Harmony only will see you next time.